Hey y'all, welcome back to another Anomaly Arbitration guide, this time featuring 4.2's new elation-oriented knights, well, except one, and the newly released Illwish boss. As always, feel free to skip to whatever timestamps you need in the description. The full presentation is also available there, as well as the form to submit your clears with an accompanying spreadsheet to view everyone else's. With that out of the way, let's begin. Night 1 features our usual Mom and Elite spam, except for the first time we're actually getting them split into two waves of enemies. Wonder who's responsible for that change. As for the returning enemies, we have the aggressing reading materials, who are twice as tanky and hit 1.5 times as hard until hit back with elation damage, and the rocking rebels, who can either hit your allies with big AoEs, or damage their allies and give a bunch of punchline if your team can churn out a fast enough aha instant. The SD Mechatrons have a 3 in 4 chance to punch you, and a 1 in 4 chance to punch an adjacent ally the first time they are hit, which turns into a 100% chance to punch their allies if they're hit with elation damage. And for our first new enemy, the Joy Ascendant splits into 2 slightly weaker copies, and then 4 even weaker copies each time it dies, granting 5 punchline per kill for a total of 35 punchline across all its copies. Our debuff this time is Confinement, cutting your damage percent by a bit and giving it back each time your character's ult. As far as I know, it's a non-factor for elation and break teams who don't use damage percent, and 20% damage for the others is really not that much. I have heard that it could be a final damage reduction though, in which case it could be a bigger deal since dealing 80% of your original damage is quite a significant nerf. It's not very kind to sustainless runs, and with the focus being more so on elites, you'll want to bring your blast DPS if not running elation, break, or DOT. Here's a spawn order for wave 1, and the splitting logic for the Joy Ascendant. The first set of respawn clones will have about 13% less HP, and the second clones will have about 25% less, making the total health pool about 5.5 times the original elite's HP. The respawn clones will always spawn at 22 and 64 action value, so do be mindful of when you kill them, so that way you aren't caught off guard by 4 clones eviscerating your entire team back to back. If you're bringing elation, the aha breakpoint to cancel the Rocking Rebel big AoE from when it first spawns is 71 action value, or about 141 aha speed. You'll almost certainly need 3 elation characters or an early Yaoguang ult to hit this breakpoint, so do be mindful. Otherwise, the safest position is on the outsides, to dodge both sweep attacks and specifically the left side, since the left sweep doesn't happen until turn 2. Probably where you'd want to put your squishies like SparxiCon in a mono-elation team for example. As mentioned before as well, be mindful of Mechatron RNG, as well as Joy Ascendant attacks so as not to get burst down randomly. As for the best DPS, Fire and Physical are the most dominant elements here, being good not just for SparxiCon and Firefly, but also Evanescence when she releases. Silverwolf 999 also naturally does well thanks to both the wave composition and the Joy Ascendant giving her free wave clears, and thus easy buff extensions, as well as the fact that she likes to run SparxiCon as a sub DPS anyways. Otherwise, just bring your best mob killer, though do note that hunts like Ashfield and Archer, as well as Mono Rem, may be more valuable versus Night 3. Sustain-wise, there's a lot of random single targeted bounce that can just end up killing you, on top of the big AoEs from the Rocking Rebels, but it's just damage here, no CCs to worry about. And since you do have a bit of control with when the enemies get to damage you, just about any sustain will do the trick. Preservation units with their taunt value and some remembrance units with their effective taunt value, aka 2 bodies, should help reduce RNG, with remembrance in particular being good at spreading out the damage from the Rocking Rebel sweep attacks and the Joy Ascendant's bounces. In terms of supports, the plethora of hit energy makes energy aligned supports like Yaoguang, Ranmei, and Robin feel a lot better here. Though if you're concerned with survival, you can of course pick an HP scaling support or RMC. Just use who's best in slot though, don't think about it too much. As for the specifics on enemy attack patterns, the Rocking Rebel will hit your rightmost 3 units on turn 1, then charges big AoE. If you squeeze an aha instant between then and its next turn instead of using an AoE on turn 2 plus enemy buff on turn 3, it will give you 10 punchline and 40% more vulnerability onto itself for 2 turns, cancel its AoE, and then damage its fellow enemies and give you 10 more punchline on its next turn. The following turn will then always be a right sweep into a left sweep. The aggressive reading materials just perform single target attacks, then will remove both their 50% damage bonus and 50% damage reduction upon either taking elation damage or if you increase your punchline to any number above 20. Important distinction, mainly now that not only do we have Yao Guang's ultimate, but EMC's as well, which, with its +5 punchlines, can sometimes dispel this state before any actual elation skills land. The SD Mechatrons will immediately charge upon spawning, advancing their action upon being hit, and then having a 75% chance to hit a random character, with a small chance to inflict strong reverberation, which delays and stuns for a turn. If you hit the lucky 25%, or get the guarantee by landing elation damage on it, it will instead punch an adjacent enemy for quite a decent chunk of damage. Afterwards, it will just do its normal punches, but hopefully it should be dead by then. As for the Joy Ascendant, it acts somewhat similar to the regular Ascended, with a single target and a 4-hit bounce on turn 1, this time inflicting Paramount Bliss as its choice of debuff instead of Wind Shear. Rather than dealing damage, Paramount Bliss sets up for something later, but can also be easily removed with a basic that also has a chance to refund an extra skill point. Very nice. Keep in mind that this attack will cause all Joy Ascendants to attack at once, with the other ones dealing 35% of the original damage. In other words, at the max 4 Joy Ascendants, this will be dealing about double the damage. Do be very careful though, as the Joy Ascendant also opens with this when it respawns turn 1 or on its normal turn 2. Leading to cases where you can get double quadra attacked and die to 32 back-to-back bounces very quickly. After that though, any DPS who have Paramount Bliss will get additionally delayed by the AoE on turn 3 and lose a skill point. Pretty annoying, but not the end of the world. The fact that it has relatively low single target HP to go through and encourages back-to-back kills makes this a pretty clear shoo-in for Silverwolf 999, though we'll get a better look at this benefit for her in the King stage. Alright, moving on to Night 2, we have the return of our new friend SparxiCon. Wave 1 this time is the 80% Quantum Res Daybreak mech, so my guess is they didn't want Archer farming her skill point refund this time around or something. Anyways, they're paired with the Canvas Peacock, who gets aggressive after being hit enough, and calms down again after breaking it in its aggro phase. SparxiCon herself, if you remember, will trap one of your DPS in a subfield by themselves, while Elation has some ways to get around this, then have them kill 3 enemies each phase, earning 100% vuln, 6 skill points, and a free AHA instant should they succeed. Very pro Elation and break, and a bit awkward for traditional debuffers like Silverwolf level 80, as her defense shred and res down implants don't transfer into the subfield. As for strategies, Wave 1 is usually quite manageable if you can plan your hits right. The Daybreak Elite should usually be focused first, as the Canvas Peacock legit does no damage if left unaddressed. However, if you have enough blast, AoE, or bounce to where hitting it is unavoidable, breaking it with high toughness attacks and saving a low toughness spam hits for the Daybreak Elite second turn charge is usually ideal. Since the Peacock gives punchline every time it goes aggro as well, it might be optimal for Elation teams to break it with non-imaginary or quantum elements so that way they can farm the punchline gain more than once. And as for the Daybreak mech, the opposite is true. Since it doesn't go into its aggro state and lock its toughness until turn 2, you can actually delay it by breaking it with imaginary or quantum implants beforehand. SparxiCon is the same usual song and dance, choose your DPS to go into the subfield, as this fight really wants you to kill off the subfield ASAP by giving SparxiCon scaling damage reduction while your team is split up. Save whatever ults you can for hitting the side output ports, especially the left one to increase your damage dealt. Small tip by the way, the output ports actually physically change out when SparxiCon starts her subfield, meaning that any debuffs on them will be reset. So if placing debuffs before that happens, focus them on SparxiCon's main body, not her side panels. There is also some merit to stalling when you kill off the subfield, since during those actions, only the DPS can be damaged, rather than the whole team staring down an AoE of shroomies. Just keep that in mind if your support's HP bars are looking kinda low. As for best matchups, yeah, this is Sparxi, Superwolves, and Firefly's dream matchup. Even Mighty as a blast unit, with most of its damage being weighted on the side targets, loves the imaginary weak, shared 3 HP content, though I guess the damage reduction on himself can be kind of annoying. You can essentially think of the stage as an Elation version of Choir, with a blast HP check instead of a break check. As such, your usual blast and AoE answers should do well here, and your killer line DPS will unfortunately probably struggle. Sorry, Seela and Ashvale, try going for the other knights instead. The damage profile of this stage is mainly AoE, but if you're planning to spend a lot of time whittling down SparxiCon's subfield, you will need good single target protection. Once again though, no CC is required, so you could just bring Bailu if you really wanted to. Don't think about it too hard. and bring whatever sustain is best for your team. Or if the other knights are giving you too much trouble, whatever sustain is left. Do be mindful if running quantum supports like Triby, Cypher, and Silverwolf, as if you let wave 1 stick around long enough, then the quantum res elite can be quite the problem. In general though, high attack frequency supports are quite good as an answer for every single enemy mechanic here. Just do be careful about running Annihility units, as their light cone debuffs generally can't be applied to the subfield, with the exception of Dahlias and Fugues S1s of course. Did I already mention this is Firefly's Paradise? Because, well, it is. Yao Guang has her usual cheese, with her and everyone else's elation skill actually hitting inside the subfield, regardless of whether they're in the prime field or not, but I would not run her in a non-elation team just for that interaction alone, especially seeing as how SparxiCon has about king level equivalent HP. Stick to using her as an elation support please, she's already stretched thin between 2 top tier DPS, soon to be 3 as it is already. Going into enemy specifics, the Canvas Peacock will start with no weaknesses in its color state, kinda like Kafka or Kokoli in Apocalyptic Shadow, where you can't reduce its toughness until you apply a weakness yourself, with like Firefly or Anaxa. Should you do that though, keep in mind that its toughness still cannot drop below 1, it refuses to be broken until you hit the 6 paint quota. So, how do you add paint to this elite then? Well, it starts off with 1 of 6 paint, and hitting it adds 1 paint stack per hit. Elation damage adds an extra 2 paint stacks, meaning that you can force this elite to enter its color state with just 2 elation hits, or 3 stacks each, compared to normally needing to hit it 5 times to increase its paint from 1 to 6. Entering the state, by the way, will cause it to stop doing weak single target attacks, and grant a one-time punchline bonus equal to 5 plus 5 times the highest number of paint stacks gained from a single element. So for example, if your EMC uses an elation skill and adds plus 3 paint, then the Peacock will add 5 punchline plus 5 times 3 more from the purple paint for a total of 20 punchline. Additionally, you cannot reduce its paint except by breaking it, which sets the paint stacks to 0, causing it to lose a bit over 100,000 HP per paint stack remaining. The only way it will lose paint is through its own attacks, which hurt a lot more compared to its colorless state single puny hits. In other words, when you cause this elite to open up its weaknesses, be prepared to break or kill it as soon as possible. As for the other Quantum Res Elite, its turn 1 is a single target and blast attack that collectively hurt for quite a lot, followed by a blast attack and entering its Daybreak Force Field state, which locks its toughness, prevents it from being CC'd, and triggers an immediate 0 AV advance whenever hit by quantum attacks. It will deal massive single target damage while in this state, so try your best to hit it 7 times within that time frame as soon as possible, which will cause it to lose its force field and gain 30% vulnerability and 40% quantum res down for 2 turns. Still would not recommend brute forcing it with quantum, as that still leaves it with 40 quantum res, but hey, the option is there. Going back into SparxiCon, its HP is actually about equal to that of King in Check SparxiCon, factoring in the 10% damage reduction debuff, and potentially even more when factoring in how Checkmate tends to provide you with buffs instead of debuffs. SparxiCon herself is pretty slow, but starts advanced, meaning she'll steal an ally of her choice and force them into her subfield pretty quickly. If the DPS manages to kill the subfield fast enough, they're rewarded by delaying SparxiCon's next action by 50%, making her take essentially double damage with 100% vulnerability, refunding 6 skill points, and triggering an AHA instant, which more than makes up for the damage loss from being forced to fight subfield enemies. If not, either via a lack of damage or your DPS dying, you'll take a bunch of damage and entanglement across your whole allies instead. Though to be fair, if this does happen to you, you're probably not winning the fight, as one of your allies will likely just be downed. While your DPS is essentially forced into Fight On Simulator, that doesn't mean your other allies can't do anything though. They can still hit the output ports next to Sparxi to either provide 5% res pen from the left port, or 10% damage reduction from the right port, with a limit of 4 hits counting on each side. Do remember to be patient and actually let the ports be advanced, then take down their turns in order to apply these effects though. Many a DPS loss has happened from trying to go in with the hyper carry ult too early. So what exactly is this subfield made of then? Well, Phase 1 has 3 aggressive reading materials with the same exact mechanics as the ones in Night 1, while Phase 2 has a middle material replaced with a mini SparxiCon instead. They also receive a 40% damage boost upon entering, which is what that right port removing the 40% damage boost is for. SparxiCon opens her first turn with a single target attack, then prompts you to pick a DPS to enter the subfield. Everyone else stays outside on the prime field, a term which you technically don't need to know since they're not in checkmate anymore. And SparxiCon gains 60% damage reduction while the subfield is up, scaling with the percent HP left in the subfield. Subfield at half HP, SparxiCon lose half her damage reduction, aka going down to 30%. Not that it matters much since your main DPS shouldn't be hitting her during this time and should be focusing their efforts on the subfield. This is just to encourage you to, actually put your DPS inside of the subfield and play with her mechanics. Likewise, SparxiCon doesn't interact with your prime field allies while the subfield is up, instead choosing to eagle up the enemies and boost them with 25% crit rate. I'd say this would be nice to have on a playable support, but enemy crits only deal 20% more damage, so it's kinda in practice. If the red bunny timer, which is how long you have to beat the subfield, reaches its conclusion, then SparxiCon will unceremoniously boot the DPS out of the subfield and hit them with a hard-hitting single target attack that entangles them. Most people will not see this attack unless their DPS is supposed to die, in which case this attack will just act as the final finisher. We discussed the damage reduction lingering mechanics just earlier, so if you do manage to break the timer, then the first turn after it will be a single target followed by an AoE attack. Again, it can be strategic to stall your DPS ending the subfield for a bit, so that SparxiCon never gets a chance to use the attack on your vulnerable supports. In Phase 2, the same exact attack pattern repeats with only minor variations. First, the opening single target gets replaced with an AoE, and the fatal single target hit, for failing to complete the timer, gets replaced by a much deadlier sheer damage AoE with a bunch of nasty debuffs attached. For most players, that opening AoE plus the change the middle subfield enemy into mini SparxiCon should be the only real changes between phases 1 and 2. Overall, very straightforward boss, textbook damage race fight. And before I forget to emphasize this, all elation skills hit inside the subfield, regardless of who uses them. It's the only way for prime field allies to damage the subfield, which should especially come in handy as Sparxi can help weaken the fire weak enemies for Silverwolf 999 to finish off. Moving on to Night 3, we have the Daybreak mechs again, except with 80% imaginary and fire res instead of quantum res. We also get 2 of them in Wave 1 that attack back to back, making for an unusually rough turn 1. This is also paired with taunting, which advances them after 6 attacks, notably 1 more than the previous taunting requirement of 5 attacks, as well as the not so new but still improved Flame Reaver. This is the clearest Monorem signpost I have ever seen, though it also happens to be very strong for Archer, as well as Ashvale and Seela if they can clear that monstrous 2 elite Wave 1. Anyways, for Reaver you know the drill, focus down the vessels it spawns, then do your best to burst down the weakened Reaver. This is probably the roughest sustained check stage with by far the hardest hitting Wave 1 turn 1, as well as being forced to tank Reaver slashes in order to gauge with its mechanics. Note that the Reaver has a special interaction with taunting, where killing his clones adds a taunting stack, so be aware that his actions in Phase 1 and early Phase 2 might happen earlier than you expect. If your damage is lacking and you have single target or blast in your kit, I'd recommend killing the outside vessels first, since Flame Reaver absorbs the outside vessels first in Phase 1. If you can kill 2 vessels, then aim for the 2 on one side, as he will always absorb 1 vessel from his left and his right on turn 2. If there are no vessels to absorb on either side, then Reaver just won't absorb them. Realistically though, you should be aiming to just kill 3 to 4 vessels before every single Reaver turn, especially in Phase 2, though the ones he spawns during his Silent Sorrow attack are luckily a bit easier to take down. And also don't add the taunting stack upon death, thank goodness. Hope you have the damage requirements necessary to take down his 1.1 million HP vessels, otherwise it's looking kinda cooked. Alrighty, Remembrance and uniquely the Hunts get to play here. Bounce DPS are not very nice to play versus taunting, and neither is the AoE due to usually needing to spam lots of weak attacks to charge up their strong nukes. By the time that third enhanced skill or Acheron ult comes around, Reaver might have just taken the vessels away already, making the matchup potentially pretty awkward for the likes of them. If you really want to bring Monolation versus the one stage explicitly designed against them, then I'd recommend either waiting for Evanescia or relying on a dual DPS Superwolf Sparxi comp to cover each other's weaknesses in Wave 1. Still not a great idea opportunity cost wise though, especially when they have 2 other stages that are just built for them here. As for sustains, your best ones will definitely do. Don't sleep on Nova Flared Huohuo compared to like E0, S0, Dan Hung PT. she'll feel a lot more comfy versus this stage provided you don't get randomly one-shot. Of course, if you have Hyacine, she can help too, but keep in mind that AoE DPS can be a double-edged sword since it means forced taunting stacks on Reaver. And in terms of supports, hey look, a Quantum Weak stage, finally! That being said, attack spam does go against Taunting's whole gimmick, so if running the likes of Tribby and Cypher here, make sure to use them with caution. It may be in your better interest to run non-attack spam supports like Ramen and Ron May even, or Ashvale, who naturally defaults to locking onto Reaver's vessels when target switching thanks to his lowest HP bait targeting mechanic, and so does not really need to worry about proccing taunting too early. I'm gonna skip over this section here with the elites. Just look at the Daybreak Elite in Wave 1 and replace Quantum with the appropriate element. Okay, cool. Compared to its previous appearance 2 rotations ago, this Reaver has 18% more HP, though thankfully without the miserable debuff that is depowered. This means that in practice, this guy ends up being not too much more difficult, though taunting means that single target DPS get uniquely good matchups and traditional AoE suffers this time around. Break, while they did get an upgrade on the whole, still dislikes Reaver, especially compared to the other 2 stages, though the DOT upgrade is enough to make them a viable choice versus boss with enough vertical investment. As a reminder, Reaver summoning his vessels taxes him for 8% of his current HP, which he refunds whenever he reabsorbs them. Killing the vessels deals 5% of his max HP as damage and removes 5% of his 40% damage reduction. So considering the fact that the vessels are about 15% of his max HP, it's usually worth it to at least focus on killing the first couple of vessels before aiming directly at Reaver if running a single target DPS, due to the damage reduction making it pretty efficient to focus the vessels first. Quick refresher, skip to the next timestamp if you've played these games before. For Phase 1, turn 1 is a blast followed by an AoE spawning 4 vessels. Turn 2 either repeats the turn 1 or has him use a blast attack up to 3 times, with the second and third times being much weaker and absorbing any adjacent vessels. Afterwards, turn 3 is a turn 2 attack, but AoE this time, as well as an AoE that scales with any vessels absorbed from the last 2 attacks. For Phase 2, turn 1 is an AoE, turn 2 has all vessels copy the AoE after the Reaver, get absorbed, then Reaver goes into a special Silent Starro state, where he summons up to 8 weaker vessels, and then turn 3 has him do his big AoEs, scaling with any vessels that weren't killed by the player. Alrighty, now to King in Check. This is our first 3-wave content that isn't pure fiction or really old memory of chaos for those that remember. Debuffs are just a combination of Knights 1 and 2. Wave 1 has 2 new enemies that deal death damage and shock to you if you don't hit them with elation, and rewards you with crit damage if they do. Wow, very cool and balanced enemy design. These enemies are paired with the Gorilla, who is countered by shields and also spawns 2 Bubble Hounds that can inflict it with max HP bleeds when killed. Wave 2 is about 2 elite HP bars disguised as a single enemy in the form of 7 bodies to take down. Pretty nice to farm kills off of, just be careful not to get ambushed with 1 million bounce attacks as mentioned before. And Wave 3 is our new boss, Illwish. Note that the 12.3 million HP is pure single target, despite it spawning loads of summons, so it's actually a fair bit tankier than it seems. Also, if not choosing the third blessing to offset its res down, which is basically just for elation and break teams, it does have 40% res off element, so it's even tankier than it initially appears. And with how frequently it tries to CC you, it has the potential to stall the fight, so try to take care of it as soon as possible. For our buffs, the first is just a ridiculous 30% defense shred buff. 6 punchline per turn is the real kicker though, being crazy enough to make solo elation on Silverwolf 999 a real thing. Like, 6 punchline per turn is double Yao Guang's passive punchline generation on every character, and it stacks, on top of the usual elation characters generating punchline. The second buff helps break quite a bit with a hefty chunk of break vulnerability and a team-wide advance for every break. I'd call it Fugue E2 at home, but the advance is even stronger than that. Strong enough, in fact, to make Bronya flight speed tuning setups extremely awkward, as Bronya can just end up cutting ahead of her DPS. That being said though, 40% fire res on the boss does make this second buff feel extremely awkward. And finally, the general buff only provides an edge really for physical lightning and imaginary crit or DOT characters, as the 20% res reduction just lowers Illwish's resistances from 40% to the normal 20% res. 40% damage is nice, but yeah, could definitely do better as far as king and check buffs go. Strategy-wise, for Elation, you want to max your speed, since every turn directly translates to more damage via punchline, especially on your supports. Conversely, for Break, damage matters way more than speed, since turn spam is punished for everyone else versus Illwish, and you do have that action advance on Break buff already. DDD can still work, but if you have the Battle Pass Break Cone, I would definitely recommend running it. Crit and Dot just want to focus on using up their DPS ults as fast as possible to remove the damage debuff. While killing the summons doesn't really weaken the boss that much, it does help delay or prevent the CC that's attached to their spawn pattern, so it's usually in your best interest to take care of them while going for the main boss. As mentioned in Night 1, don't let yourself get burst down by the Wave 2 Joy Ascendant, time killing it so that dealing with the next doubled in quantity wave isn't a miserable affair. Overall, there's lots of mobs to kill for pretty nice kill-related value, mainly looking at E2 Firefly, Ashvale, and Seela here potentially, and plenty of fodder for units like Silverwolf 999 and Finon to waste their bounce and split damage attacks on. Still though, there's way too much unconditional reward in Silverwolf 999's case for every mob she kills, and while Pinon is a special case thanks to a solo mechanic interacting favorably versus Illwish. Still, for every other DPS with bounce as a major part in their kit, expect this fight to be a major uphill battle. There really is just no contesting it. This stage is handcrafted to make Superwolf look as good as possible, with huge credit owed to that 40% fire res stifling her toughest competition in Blast with single target focused content right now. Finon vs Illwish has a nifty interaction where Illwish doesn't spawn any Lotuses versus solo Finon, meaning that he just annihilates it in single target, and Evernight, despite being unable to do much to save herself from being CC'd, is just straight up CC immune. So yeah, pretty favorable matchup as well, though the lack of weaknesses and Illwish technically being a single target boss means that she might not be the fastest clear even with how comfortable she is. Might 8, DOT, and Ashvale all match up nicely into lots of frequent attacking enemies for different reasons. And out of the Nova Flares, Seela and Welt seem like the best candidates for taking down the boss, with Seela having Res Pen and Resurgence, and Welt having the highest element advantage and the raw numbers. Not sure how well going against non-quantum weak and anti-bounce content worked for them in practice, but hey, if you have enough Eidolons on them, it might be worth a shot. The fact that this stage griefs non-attacking supports, as well as Remembrance on the whole, means that Archer, Casterus, and Aglaya are a bit doomed. Though to give Aggie some credit, she probably manages the best without Sunday, and her single target is favorable, so if you have the vertical, she might be a bit better than Sparkle-less Archer, and Remembrance with basic spam Hyacine. As for sustains, this stage has a lot of single target and bounce with some AoE mixed in, as well as CCs via a frequently delayed Outrage and Dominate. As such, you'll want to bring a cleanser like Danhung BT, Hyacine, or Huohuo, with special mention to Danhung BT, with his shields being good versus the Gorilla in Wave 1. Elation and Break have lower sustain requirements, so there is a bit more flexibility if using them, or if you just have Superwolf on your account, there is that global passive to keep in mind as well. Note that effect res does not work versus the boss's CC. It works kind of like Terra Grip, where if you still have the debuff, which is unresistible this time, you will get CC'd at the end of your turn. CC resistances like Fu Xuan's does work if you want to use her, but let's say versus Hyacine and Gallagher, who like to stack a bunch of F-res, yeah, they're still getting absolutely destroyed. For supports, Illwish has 40% res without a third buff, which means that for Break, your Ranmei value actually does go up quite substantially. That being said, Harmony MC does still look pretty good for frequent dance procs. Sparkle and Sunday are especially weak to boss's CC mechanics, so do watch out for that as well. On that same token, compared to Sparkle and Sunday who don't attack spammers like Shibby and Dahlia can do pretty well for themselves, preventing themselves from getting CC'd, and as well with E1 Trivia in particular, taking all the damage dealt on the Lotuses and converting it back to Illwish. For Elation specifically, there are unique techs with supports like Asta who can make the team excel with that first buff, especially granting 6 punchline every turn. Getting into attack patterns, let's start with a new magical girl trope enemy. They just perform single target attacks while alive, but their gimmick allows them to deal damage upon death. They start in the rainy day state, where if killed, they do 5 bounce attacks with a chance to shock on each one. If you hit them with elation damage though, they instead enter the sunny day state, delaying their next attack by 25%, giving 2 punchline, then buffing the team with 25% crit damage for 2 turns if killed in this state. Their next attack will switch them back to the rainy day state, but again, any elation damage just makes them sunny again. Basically, if no elation, this enemy makes you pay with your HP. Very fun and interactive design, especially considering this is the first look at what unpreventable death damage looks like. 2 of these then pair with a sweet gorilla, which, if you need a refresher course, its attacks can be bounced back onto itself if hitting shields, dealing max HP damage to itself and lowering its defenses. On turn 1, it does a single target hit, followed by summoning 2 bubble hounds. The more you hit these robo dogs, the more bleed damage they deal on death, up to a whopping 10% max HP each turn for 2 turns. It also does buff their damage a bit the more you hit them, but really that part doesn't usually come into effect. Turn 2 is another single target, followed by locking its toughness, and turn 3 is 4 of those single target attacks randomly scattered across your team. Low HP allies, beware. Wave 2 we've gone over before, so not much to mention besides the fact that the 10% damage reduction from stability means they hit slightly less hard. So that just leaves us with the Illwish Archlotus itself. With 12.3 million HP per phase, on top of 10% damage reduction, it's quite the tanky single target enemy. Other than being a big HP sponge, its main mechanic is inflicting happiness, which is a delayed CC that, while on your characters, causes up to 2 Illwish Lotuses to spawn at the start of each of their turns. These Lotuses are a tad bit weaker than Night 3's Vessels, boosting Illwish's damage by 10% each time they act, stacking up to 100%. You really don't want these Lotuses to get out of control, not just prevent the CC from resolving and turning your allies into puppets, as well as the damage boost that they rack up, but also to try and chase a special buff that provides 80 crit damage and puppet immunity for 2 turns, and even the small but significant 20% vulnerability from killing 6 of them, which stacks. Oh, and elation units get the extra benefit of punchline in case the 6 punchline per turn from the stage wasn't biblically greedy enough. Phase 1 has Illwish open with a single target, followed by inflicting 2 random characters with 2 out of 6 stacks of happiness. While characters have happiness, they gain 2 of those stacks per turn and spawn 2 Illwish Lotuses on the enemy field if space is available, and lose 1 stack per attack performed and Lotus killed. Note that the in-game description, at least for the time being, is incorrect when it says that characters lose 1 stack from summoning Illwish Lotuses. There is no stack loss whatsoever tied to summoning Illwish Lotuses, as far as I've tested anyways. Also, Memo Sprite's attacks do not contribute to lowering this counter. The attacks must come directly from the Memo Master, which is particularly disastrous to Hyacine, who relies on Eco more than herself and cannot launch an attack herself while skill spamming. There are 2 main reasons you want to try and lower this counter. 1, hitting the max 6 stacks causes the character to enter the happiness puppet state at the end of their turn, which, like how the Terrified debuff works, bypasses effect res. It does not, however, bypass CC immunity, which is relevant for Evernight and especially Fu Xuan. Oh, and the rate up anniversary character with the CC dispelling global passive too, I guess. This happiness puppet state forces your character to basic on their next turn, either on a random ally, aka dominated, or on an enemy, aka outraged, gaining 2 punchline in the process, or 10 if you're lucky enough to hit an enemy and get the special effect. Kinda funny how punchline is being shilled here when the DPS who can best abuse this mechanic should never be getting CC'd anyways. It's a nice consolation prize, I guess. The second reason is that bringing your stacks down to 0 by chaining attacks and kills removes the happiness state altogether, and provides total puppet immunity for 2 turns along with 80% crit damage, something that will be a lot more relevant next phase. I guess there's also a slightly significant third reason in that its turn 2 will hit all allies with happiness and heal for 0.5% of its max HP per ally hit, but considering that it's regaining like 120k max HP at most, and if it has no targets, it'll just perform a single attack for double the damage, I don't think it matters that much in the grand scheme of things unless you're just like really tight on damage. Phase 2 then has it repeat the same turn 1 and almost the same turn 2, with a charge and a toughness lock instead of a single target attack. Turn 3 is a decent AoE, that more importantly forces the happiness puppet CC onto everyone. Note that just like the natural 6 out of 6 happiness application, this debuff also ignores effect res, so your Galagars and Hyacines are going to be out of commission for the next turn. Looks like there can be a downside into not just speccing into crowd control res specifically, but man, that is quite the niche case. Anyways, that's this whole Anomaly Arbitration covered, so let's do something fun and talk about exactly how tailor-made the stages for Silverwolf 999. First of all, the Elation buff granting 6 punchline per turn is legit crazy. In a traditional 300 action value 0 cycle scenario, it's not unreasonable for Mono Elation plus Huohuo to hit 25 collective turns, which turns into 150 punchline across the whole battle. However, if you build into this buff and run, say, DDD Asta to really maximize your turns, then you can hit as high as 40 plus turns and thus around 250 punchline. When combined with the small 4 punchline boost from Wave 1, the significant 35 guaranteed punchline from Wave 2, and an average of 8 Lotus kills across Wave 3, 4 per phase for 40 punchline, Superwolf teams across the entire fight can generate as much as 200 to 300 punchline, all of which is completely dependent on the environment, by the way. Mathematically, increasing your punchline does have diminishing returns, but it's still a significant final damage increase either way. Not to mention that spreading this punchline across the fight ensures that Superwolf especially has virtually 0 ult downtime, which is normally her biggest weakness. And if you're gunning for that E2, well, 120 punchline and 1 ult suddenly becomes a lot easier to hit. Heck, even 240 punchline is within reach for the full 2 extra turns within her 3-turn ult. But perhaps the biggest change in favor of Superwolf here is the 3-wave layout of this stage. Every time she kills every enemy on field, her buffs get extended by 1 turn, and she gets an extra turn in order to finish the rest of her enhanced basic. This actually makes her fairly kill-aligned in order to snowball as, remember, Certified Banger, which Elation scales off of, exists as a 2-turn buff. And extra turns that she gets in order to fill the rest of her basic attack do not count as turns for buff purposes. And what better way to trigger this condition than a solo Wave 2 Elite that gives you not 1, but 3 separate chances to proc this buff extension, and also lowers its HP every time it splits, giving the illusion of AoE being strong into it while still fundamentally catering to single target damage numbers. All of that is on top of the 40% fire res specifically hindering Sparxi's performance, by the way, making Silver 9's share of the damage contribution with her on the team look more impressive. Heck, you technically don't even need Sparxi because of that, in much the same way that the Elation buff makes Yao Guang an upgrade but not a substantial one here. To reiterate, I'm talking about King and Check only, she's pretty dependent on them otherwise. To me, this reads like Hoyo messing things up by making their anniversary unit dependent on supports that release before her official debut, and thus needing to make content that favors her and only her. How else do you explain a break-specific buff alongside a Firefly Nova Flare that suggests a favorable Illwish matchup, only to turn around and make the boss 40% fire res for break specifically? Something tells me that it's not to even the playing field between her, Rappa, and Boothill, as nice of a conclusion as that would be. I guess this goes to show that if Hoyo wants the unit to succeed, they will bend over backwards to make it happen. This means that if you really want to get a leg up in the metagame, I would suggest you choose who you want to get buffed in the To the Ones That Blaze event, because while you aren't necessarily getting a free copy of that unit, you might just be helping to free them from the shackles of Tier 5 obscurity. Thanks for watching.